1960, Harrison E. Salisbury, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the New York Times, flew to Birmingham, Alabama for a stay of 3 days. On April the 12th and 13th, the New York Times published articles by Salisbury, datelined Birmingham. The reporter wrote that fear and hatred gripped the city, that every channel of communication, every medium of mutual interest, every reasoned approach, every inch of middle ground has been fragmented by the emotional dynamite of racism, so wrote Harrison Salisbury. The 2 articles resulted in a libel suit filed by Birmingham's 3 city commissioners and by a detective against the New York Times, seeking damages totaling $1,600,000. April the 14th, the Birmingham morning newspaper, the Post-Herald, reprinted the Salisbury articles. Reaction was immediate.
How could a man know whether there was a reign of terror? He mentioned the rope, the knot, the whip, the razor, all sorts of instruments of violence and torture. If that existed, surely someone other than Harrison Salisbury would have observed it. No, I can't find any explanation of a top-notch newspaper man like Mr. Salisbury writing a piece like that.
I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Salisbury, and I realize I'm saying that as a resident of Birmingham. I live here. A person can be terrorized. I've gone through it, and maybe it's natural for me, being a leader. But there have been persons who were not Negroes or who were not overt leaders, as I am, outspoken, who've been terrorized.
I have never seen fear in Birmingham that has been expressed in the northern newspapers. We're not afraid of anything. If we are afraid of anything, perhaps it's that outside agitators attempting to cause trouble, attempting to sell newspapers, will cause trouble that actually doesn't exist. We know of no fear, no great fear for our lives, for reprisals.
I can tell the people of America, don't live here. White, black, red, yellow, green. Not under this. Life isn't worth living.
Originally, CBS reports came to Birmingham to chronicle the libel action between Birmingham and the New York Times. After this case has been tried in the proper courts, we shall hope to report on that action, and in so doing, to examine the libel laws in this country, how they protect the rights of the individual and the freedom of the press. Tonight, however, we report on the background and mood of Birmingham by letting some of the people of that community speak of and for their city. Now, here is CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Howard K. Smith.
Birmingham is called the Magic City, having grown to its present size in 75 years. It is also called the City of Churches, with over 700 churches of all denominations. Birmingham has good homes and slums as other cities have. It boasts a highly regarded medical center and an excellent museum. Industrially, the city is dominated by a heavy concentration of steel mills. Birmingham is the largest segregated city in the South. Every phase of activity, business, cultural, and social, is segregated. For residents, both white and Negro, the most memorable date in recent years is May the 17th, 1954, the day when the Supreme Court of the United States, in a unanimous decision, handed down a ruling that segregation in any public school in the United States is a violation of the American Constitution. The population of the metropolitan Birmingham area is 640,000. Of those, 235,000, more than a third, are Negroes. David Lowe, who has been working on this report for 9 months, first interviewed John Temple Graves, lecturer, author, newspaperman, a columnist in the Birmingham morning newspaper, the Post-Herald, said to be the voice of the segregated South.
Isn't it possible that a greater medium than the New York Times could tell the truth about this city? I'm amazed to find that in your mind and in the mind of so many, we are the villain of the Southern peace, that this is the worst city in the South for oppression of the races, for violence between the races. We are honestly amazed at that thought, that honest thought on the part of people like yourself, and you're an honest man. It isn't so, and yet how can we have the thing denied? Not through one newspaper, not through winning a libel suit against the New York Times, but we can have it denied if a vast thing like television undertakes to be fair, as I think you mean to be fair to us. And I don't mean that you will take our side necessarily. We are guilty of all sorts of sins, sins against the Negro, sins against economy, and many sins, and yet no more proportionally than other parts of the country. It's simply that when anything happens here or in the South, they say, oh, that's the South. If it happens in Chicago, they say that's a murder on Main Street in Chicago. But if it happens in Birmingham, oh, that's the bloody, violent South.
Colonel William S. Pritchard, a leading attorney in Birmingham.
Substantially all of the Negroes in Alabama, and perhaps in the South, Deep South, have the same background. They were all savages in Africa. Their parents sold them into slavery, or their chieftains sold them into slavery. They were brought into this country in a state of savagery. They didn't speak the language of the country. They had no concept of the economy of the country. They had no concept of working in order to obtain a livelihood. Their concept, when they were hungry, was to roam the jungles of Africa and to live in the forests and the fruits of the forest and the meats that they secured there. When they were brought into this economy, it was entirely strange and different from them. And they had to be reconciled to it. I have no doubt that the Negro basically knows that the best friend he's ever had in the world is a Southern white man. He'd do the most for him, always has, and will continue to do it. But when they from Northern agitators spurred on to believe that they are the equal to the white man in every respect and should be just taken from savagery and put on the same plane with the white man in every respect. That's not true. He shouldn't be. It hurts the Negro. And that feeling has brought about this estrangement. And that feeling is brought about by outside sources, not by the Negroes residing in the South, in my judgment.
Well, Colonel, in view of the fact that possibly the federal government will ask the city of Birmingham at least to integrate their school system, what do you think will happen when that comes through?
I don't believe it'll ever happen. There would be a measure of violence in Birmingham, in my opinion, I regret to say. There's a lot of white people here that say this, that even the dumbest farmer in the world knows that if he has white chickens and black chickens, that the black chickens do better if they're kept in one yard to themselves, the white chickens do better if they're kept in a separate yard to themselves. They each do better under those conditions. And that a farmer who would mix the white and the black chickens would be the dumbest man in the world.
The club is a gathering place for society in Birmingham. One of the cultural leaders of the community is Mrs. George Bridges.
We've just been a saturated solution of culture. We're bursting at the seams with it right now as we had the Festival of Arts, which includes all of our arts. You see, it's been almost a 3 weeks continuous activity. It started as a showcase for our local artists to show what they could do and to give them some encouragement. Because my theory is that the Southern way of life is more conducive to creative activity. But we have a terrific erosion of culture to the north. And this could, Festival of Arts is sort of like the little CCC they had during Roosevelt's regime, you know, to stop the erosion of soil, to give our own artists some encouragement and a little financial help.
Mrs. Bridges, are you personally aware of prejudice in Birmingham?
Well, of course, I guess there's a certain amount of prejudice, but I'm not aware of there being much prejudice, nothing like the people of the North seem to think. Among my friends, we don't seem to have any particular prejudice. I was Alabama chairman for UNICEF, and UNICEF was sending out an international exhibition of children's artwork from all the children of the world, even African children. So I had the idea of comparing it with our local children and getting all of the local schools to send in schoolwork. And a boy that won happened to be a Negro, that had come from the Negro schools. And then he and his mother and family went down to see his exhibit. It was when we were exhibiting at the library. And it's against the city ordinance for the Negro people to come into the white library, so he was stopped at the door and not allowed to come. And they called me in great distress. I didn't know up until then who it was had won, but I had no trouble in arranging special permission for him and his family to go in and see the picture. It was just a question of making a phone call and explaining the situation. And I think art and culture belongs to everyone. On that level, I think we have very little prejudice. Now, I admire the Negro race very much. They have made more progress than any race ever has in a shorter length of time. It's simply phenomenal to think the progress they have made. And many of them are doing fine creative work. In fact, I think that's one of the contributing factors to our creativeness in the South, is a sort of joyousness of the Negro. You know, he was happy and contented. You don't hear that anymore. Now, as a girl, we used to hear Negroes singing all the time. They just walked down the street and singing. And the servants in the house would sing, the gardeners would sing, and there was just sort of like in Spain or Mexico now. But I haven't heard a Negro just spontaneously break into song in 4 or 5 years. And that's bad, because they're not happy and we're not happy about it.
William Mobley, a police reporter for 19 years, relates the incident about a Negro man named Judge Aaron.
Judge Aaron is a Negro man at that time, 32 years of age. He and a girlfriend were walking along a country road late at night when these these 6 Klansmen came by in an automobile, threw him in a car, carried him to a Klan hideout and castrated him, put turpentine in the wounds, and threw him out on the outskirts of the city and left him there, where he was found by a couple of police officers and taken to the hospital. The turpentine, which evidently had been used for additional pain to the victim, according to the doctors who treated him at the hospital, said possibly saved his life because it cauterized the wounds and kept him from bleeding to death.
Why did they do this?
They never could explain why. They met and agreed to go out and do something, so they looked around in several places, according to the testimony that came out in the 4 trials that followed. And they never told why. They never, and Judge Aaron was just an innocent victim. It could have happened to any one of 50,000 or more Negroes in Birmingham.
This crime took place on September the 2nd, 1957. The perpetrators of the crime against Judge Aaron were convicted after 4 trials and were sentenced to long terms. Hugh A. Locke, an attorney, formerly a Chancery Court judge.
I think the racial unrest in Birmingham is existing largely in the minds of people outside of Birmingham. Birmingham, for instance, has never had a lynching, not one. They have never, in their whole existence, had any racial trouble that amounted to anything appreciable, such as they have in Chicago, had in Detroit or Buffalo, such as they are now having in Washington. We've never had those troubles.
Your Honor, do you think the northern people understand the South and the southern people?
The difference in the South is hard for you to understand. For instance, I was born on one farm, and about 4 or 5 miles from there, at my aunt's farm, there was a nigger born the same day I was born, Jack Finney. And why, that nigger would do anything, that nigger would do anything for me, and I'd do anything for him. And that's just the way we feel about it. There's nothing wrong with good people in the North, or in the West, or in the East, or in the South. But there is now, has been created, a genuine prejudice and friction And it is dangerous, especially in the view of the fight Russia is making. I have an old man that's been working for me a long time, and it's just a little thing, but my wife mentioned he's a yard man. My wife mentioned something about some flowers being very beautiful. He immediately said they come from Russia. Now that was very significant to me. That good old man, loyal as can be to me and my family, we trust him. But nevertheless, somebody had been telling him that the beautiful things and the good things came from Russia.
I would like you to explain to us the workings of the White Citizens Council.
Well, there's nothing secret about it. But it is an organization of men who were native-born Americans. They reached the conclusion that everybody was organized but them, and that they were not even getting the privileges that most people were. Or they were afraid that a lack of organization would create just a misbalance. The Citizens Council is an organization of those citizens. Now we are in a Cold War with Russia over communism. The South is intensely with America in that fight. I think as much or more, I'm not comparing now, but the South and Alabama, let's say Alabama, I don't know all of the South, but I say Alabama is intensely against communism, and they are intensely for the preservation of the freedom that our Constitution has given. Now, your Citizens Council, let's speak of it in the broad sense. Your Citizens Council is here to speak for the native-born American.
Would you say that any members of the Jewish community can join the White Citizens Council?
No, I don't think they do. It's the American, strictly.
Birmingham is proud of its white colleges. Birmingham Southern College and the newer Howard College are both in the metropolitan area.
The people in the North don't seem to realize that here in the South for a long time we've had a certain way of life. This way of life has been instilled in us from the time we were born until the time we die. Now, my grandparents and my parents are more prejudiced than I am. That's simply because they have lived this way of life much longer than I have. The people in the North fail to realize that you cannot change a way of life overnight. This way of life is a part of us, and although it might not be right, it will take time to overcome. And the more they try to force us into doing something, then the worse the reaction will be, because no one likes to be forced into anything.
I don't believe in the mixing of the races, and I don't care what anybody says. I might be prejudiced. I don't know. I probably am, but I can't conceive of a society that would put their children through school from kindergarten or the first grade all the way through college and then expect them not to have mixing of the races. And I am against this entirely, and that is the principal reason that I am against integration, because I do not want to see the races mixed.
Well, so much has been said on making the Negro education equal to our education by just pouring more money into their schools, and I mean, in quotes, Negro schools. And I don't believe that no matter how much money you put into these schools that you can make them altogether equal in quality to ours, because they do not have the opportunities of, say, being here at Southern with us and knowing us, and it just cannot be the same, because they're off by themselves in a little group, just completely segregated. And to me, it seems as though, when I think of myself perhaps being in their place, as if they're not really part of our society, that they're just there, sort of in suspension. And you did ask us, do we know these people that we're talking about? And I think that right there is a good point, because we don't. I don't think there are any of us maybe here who know Negro college students. And if we could have them here at our school, we have lots of foreign students here, but people right around the corner we completely ignore. And if we had them here, we could know their problems, and we would get to know them as people and not as a race.
I think that this business about the Negro being inferior is a vicious circle. People who are economically depressed don't have the cultural opportunities. They don't have the health opportunities. When you don't have enough to eat, you don't feel yourself interested in the philosophies of mankind. You're interested in getting something more to eat. And I think that as long as we keep the Negro on the level that he is, he's going to stay there. I'm afraid that it's impossible, without the breaking down of the barriers, for the Negro to raise themselves economically and socially.
The colored man knows where he stands. The white man knows where he stands. In the North, I wonder, I've traveled in the North, having served in the Army. The colored man didn't know where he stood. Certainly, we have signs saying colored and white at eating places, at other places. The colored man knows that he is not to enter there, that there is segregation. In the North, he never knows.
I think that this is a personal conviction that I have. I think that the shame of the whole problem of integration, or what have you, whatever you want to call it, it's a shame that it will not come in the church first.
I think that part of the problem is the conflict between what we ought to do and what we want to do. In principle, I am definitely against segregation, but yet when I see the standards of the Negroes around me, especially in the South, I can't say that I want to go to school with them and want to be held back because their background is not as good as mine. And when I see their homes, I can't say that I want to eat in the same restaurant with them. But yet, as far as principles, I feel that I, as a white person, am responsible for their conditions by keeping them economically low and keeping their educational standards down. So I feel that laws are necessary to make me do what I ought to do, even though I don't want to right now.
Mr. Hugh Comer, an industrialist, civic leader, and for more than 30 years, teacher of a famous Sunday school class.
A lot of people look on the conditions in the South as Neanderthal. And, you know, that's a long time ago when that's pretty rugged. But I don't think so. I think that this South country, as several years ago, realized its potential for greatness. As a matter of fact, our congressman, old Sam Hobbs, that was his theme song. Southerners, get ready for greatness because the South is making its pitch. And now down here, the people that I know, well, you can look around you and see there that the buildup of this South country didn't come through sluggards and mint julep drinkers and that kind of business. It became by the result of men working and working hard and working for the community. We want to build up through our own efforts, not organized efforts, because organized efforts thrive on tension. You know that, and I know that. If we could be left alone, we would create a social and an economic climate, I'm quoting them, in which people such as ourselves, any color, could progress and continue to survive.
I did hear, Mr. Comer, that you have a special theory of your own concerning increasing the buying power of the Negro in Alabama.
That's right. Now, if we've got approximately 1 million Negroes in Alabama. Well, naturally, you can pick out any number of dollars that you want, but I'll say $10. If you were to increase the purchasing power of these million people in our state $10 a year, you have then created right here in Alabama a $10 million market. If we can get these people to where they'll buy from us, because I sell, you know, and I sell what they buy. They buy mattress ticking, they buy this cloth, they buy these this underwear. In other words, the $10 million would advantage me, particularly with, and all the other things, for heaven's sake. Nobody has got their finger on this fella because of his color. It's what can he do? You know, the day of the wool hat is gone. You can't turn machinery that we buy here today over to an ignorant, clumsy clown. He's got to have a skill, he's got to have intelligence, he's got to have an intellect. And he's got to want to do it himself.
Bishop C.C.J. Carpenter, a resident of Birmingham for 25 years, is the Episcopal Bishop of Alabama.
Is there any communication at the present time between the thinking members of both races?
That's our biggest weakness. It's probably due to the fact that the Negro is not able to talk in any terms of less than complete integration. The white man is not willing to talk in terms of complete integration. The gradual approach has been pretty well shelved for the time, and it's very difficult to have the communication which we greatly need. I think we are earnestly trying to find answers to this situation. We're in a situation, we know it. It came too quickly. There are many of us who, and I say us because I'm of that group, who were working along pretty satisfactorily, we thought, before the Supreme Court decision. We felt we were making progress in the relationship between the races. I think we were. We've been set back.
Mrs. Cecil Roberts, Birmingham's best-known civic and cultural leader.
Mrs. Roberts, how is the gap between the two races going to be closed in Birmingham?
Well, it's going to take a lot of common sense on both sides, and there must be compromise on both sides. Neither side, one side can't keep all it wants to keep, the other side can't get all it wants to get, certainly not immediately. Anyway, there's got to be giving and taking. There's got to be communication between the two people. There's got to be an understanding of my point of view. There's got to be an understanding of someone else's problem. And until I think there is a communication, there's a willingness to compromise, there's a willingness to give and to take, we'll have a serious problem here.
One of the central pivots of the Birmingham story should be heard from at this point, but Police Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor has remained unavailable. Of him, Time magazine has stated, "In the death of leadership, the silence of fear, the bomb blasts of hatred, Birmingham is the toughest city in the South and is likely to get tougher." It is also why the voice of a police chief, Bull Connor, has emerged as the voice of one of the great cities of the United States. If Bull Connor is unwilling to talk, Birmingham is willing to talk about Bull Connor.
But I think perhaps Mr. Connor is a much more honest man than most of us. He puts into print and says out loud, in no uncertain terms, the way he feels about things. Whereas too much restraint, I believe, is shown by the general populace on these same lines. And so I think we do owe him gratitude in the fact that he does reflect the way we think. And I think he's right there before us every day as a reminder of what this community is actually standing for in the public eye.
Mrs. Leon C. Palmer, a churchwoman, does what few people do in Birmingham, criticize Bull Connor.
How does Bull Connor campaign for office? Does he campaign as an avid segregationist?
Oh, he's going to fight against, he's not going to have integration. He'll fight the Supreme Court and fight the Attorney General, going to fight everybody. And he said, "Why do you care what happens?" And I said, "Because I'm an American citizen. We wouldn't have any government if we didn't have a Supreme Court and didn't have some laws. And I'm for law and order, and we can work it out some way, but we can't define law."
And then I said, Bull, I am so sick and tired of you jumping up and yelling nigger, nigger every time you want some votes that I'm going to fight you to a finish.
Aren't you afraid of Bull Connor?
I'm afraid of Bull Connor? No. That's amusing.
Vincent Townsend, editor of the Birmingham News, a member of the Newhouse chain.
There's been really no real disturbances in Birmingham, and I believe people in Birmingham believe that the Commissioner of Public Safety means exactly what he says, that he is not going to permit any agents of turmoil, whether they are white or Negro, to cause breaches of the peace in Birmingham.
In fairness, it should be said that editor Townsend's newspaper, the Birmingham News, which supported Commissioner Connor in the recent primary, this week criticized him for failing to prevent the violence in the Birmingham bus terminal. CBS reports Who Speaks for Birmingham continues immediately after this pause for station identification.
CBS reports Who Speaks for Birmingham continues. Here again is Howard K. Smith.
The whites regret that there is no communication with the Negroes, but they have no objection to the continued segregation of all activities, including education. They acknowledge the toughness of the Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene Bull Connor, but they support him. They claim that although there has been violence in Birmingham, it has been exaggerated by the northern press. And to a man, the whites see nothing but greatness in Birmingham's future. What about the 235,000 Negroes of Birmingham?
I served in World War II for 42 months. There I was wounded, shipwrecked. I was only one out of 10 that was saved. I served in, they call it the police action, the Korea War. I was in reserve and I was called back. Both of my leg was broke, my foot. Got 16 stitches across my stomach one way and 14 another. My face is plastic surgery and I got a plate in my head. Since that I come back, my home is in Birmingham. I was born here. Since I come back and joined the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, trying to bring about a community of brother love, I have been taken out by evil men, have been beaten with chains until the blood run down. I have been laughed at by the policemen who should have been looking for the men who had taken me out and did these things unto me. I don't have no envy in my heart, no malice against no white man or no black man. I believe that through our fight here, that we're going to bring both races close together. There's a lot of people here who are afraid, black and white, to speak out, because they're afraid they may lose something. But I have nothing to lose but my life. And I think now that the Lord has given me enough and I'm living on borrowed time now.
I'm a minister who was arrested and sentenced to serve 6 months at hard labor and fined $500 for preaching the truth, telling the congregation of which I am the pastor that God created all men equal. I was placed in jail, handcuffed, locked in the truck, got out on bond, and every Sunday, carloads of policemen would sit around at the church.
Reverend C. Herbert Oliver, president of the Greater Birmingham Council of Human Relations, an organization attempting to improve race relations.
Reverend Oliver, are the Negro members of this community harassed in any fashion?
Well, last February, I wrote a letter to the Birmingham News, and the paper published the letter.
What did the letter say?
I criticized the governor for some statements that he had made in Washington concerning voting Negroes in Alabama. And after the letter was published, that night I began to receive a number of threatening phone calls. people asking what kind of fertilizer do you want us to make your children of, and that young niggers make good fertilizer. Old ones are pretty tough.
At the height of this, how many phone calls were there a day and night?
I would guess at the height of it there were about 20 to 30 a night.
Is it usually a male voice or a female voice?
Mostly male voices, and few of the callers who called me used obscenities.
Has your wife ever answered the phone?
Yes, she answers it most of the time.
I am a child. I have been arrested for sitting in Cress's department store. I am on probation until I am 18 years old. I was dragged off to jail in August. My dress was torn because they handled me so roughly. They wouldn't even tell me that I was under arrest, but just pulled me until one of the nice policemen said, yes, you are under arrest, and took me on.
Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth of the Bethel Baptist Church is the Negro feared most by the white citizens of Birmingham. A militant leader, he has a faithful following. He has been the target of a mob, 2 bombings, and a long history of harassment. Reverend Shuttlesworth is the voice of the Negro in Birmingham, who no longer is willing to wait for the whites to make a move toward equality of the races. For the privilege of leading his people, he has paid a heavy penalty.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, what is life like for you in Birmingham?
Well, life for me, it's pretty difficult, if I could use that expression. I have to have somebody to guard my home at night. Been for 4 years. The police won't do it. It causes your family, wife and children, to go through severe strain and so forth. But we've learned to make out on it. We found out that if you can't take it, you can't make it. There have been 2 bombings there, and life is a struggle here for me in Birmingham, but it's a glorious struggle.
Would you care to tell us about the 2 bombings?
The first bombing was in December 1956, Christmas night, when somebody planted 12 sticks of dynamite between the church and the house where it was then, about that space, and you have to turn sideways to walk between. The dynamite was placed right at the corner of the church and the corner of the house. And that's where the head of my bed was, and I was in the bed, so that it blew the wall that was between my head and the dynamite away. It blew the floor from underneath the bed. We never did find where the springs went to. The front columns were blown into the street, and the roof came down, yet I didn't get a scratch. So I said that I was saved to lead the fight.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, how many times have you been beaten?
Well, physically, I've been mobbed once, badly. I have faced 2 mobs in this city. And of course, I have no doubt that I would have been beaten in the jails upon one of my arrests, but for the fact that there were several more men arrested with me. Some of the whites really wanted to get to me. I had no fear, however.
When you say you were badly beaten, how badly?
Quite badly. The first time I saw brass knuckles, I was being struck with them. This mob had chains, brass knuckles, sticks, and other things in front of Phillips High School in September '57, when we went down and tried to enroll the children. And this wrist was almost broken, and I was knocked to the ground, I guess 5 or 6 times. I was kicked. My face was terrifically scarred. The skin were all off my ears. My knees were badly scuffed up. I have scars now that are visible behind here, 1 or 2 in my head, 1 there. Now, you're conscious that they're trying to kill you. And really, this mob at this time weren't just trying to beat me up. They were trying to kill me. You see, actually, a mob is so bent on doing harm till they are not composed. And it's amazing how weak a person is who is a mobster at the time. My own personal feelings, I think that's what you want to get is you feel sorry. You don't understand how men, otherwise calm, peaceable men, whether they be white or otherwise, could act worse than raving beasts, could just want blood, and no matter how they do, and they realize that the cameras were there, they realized they were being seen, but their hopes were to kill me, to get me. So you see, I've been near death 3 times in Birmingham, so.
Reverend, would you mind giving us your feelings about the police commissioner of the city of Birmingham?
Well, Mr. Connor has a rough voice, and he used to announce baseball. He has a kind of a voice that's not smooth. And he takes pride in being rough. He takes pride in talking to people roughly. Even white people. I've been down to the commission, and he talked to some of those white people worse than he talked to me or anybody else. And he wants the white people to believe that just by his being in office, he can prevent the inevitable. So he has to talk loud. He has to be loud, because when the sound and fury is all gone, then there'll be nothing. There'll be emptiness.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, how many times have you been arrested?
I've been arrested at least 3 or 4 times. I've been in jail quite a few times. And of course, don't let it worry you, I'm involved at the moment in 14 lawsuits, including 3 with the Times, or 4 with the Times. And my children were arrested in Gadsden. Of course, I have several suits here in Birmingham. We mean to kill segregation, be killed by it.
The hope of the future for the Negroes rests primarily in their young people. Miles College, staffed by and restricted to Negroes, is one of 2 such colleges in Birmingham. Its president is Reverend Lucius Pitts, recently of Atlanta.
What are the facts about education in Birmingham?
Well, let's quote them. It's so much better than it used to be, and this is true, so much better. But I would venture to say that education in Birmingham is like it is in most of the South. That the inadequacy in Negro education would astound the average white man if he knew it. You pass a building that looks adequate on the outside, but to go inside and check the scientific equipment, the library equipment, the teacher load, the cafeteria, the lack of a health and physical education building, this kind of thing, and then you go across the street. Well, I say figuratively across the street. And it is much more nearly adequate. I would think really that education for nobody in the South is adequate in terms of, and this is partially because we haven't had industry in the South.
Sir, you've raised a family in the South. What are the problems of a parent with Negro children? How do the children learn? How do they learn they're different?
Well, my experience with my own children, with other children when I have taught, that some things they learn slowly and other things have to be knocked into them, and then some things they learn almost abruptly. It's a painful thing to be a reading Negro, well, say an educable Negro in the South with a family, to try to decide how much you tell your child and how you interpret the situation to him so that he doesn't develop the kind of hatred and fear and conditioning that I have had to strive to try to get rid of.
Why is it, do you think, that the Negro can't find his pride?
He's been brainwashed. In the newspaper, in the radio, in the kitchens, in the streetcars, in job opportunities. My little boy said to me, and it frightened me nearly to death, he said, Daddy, I can never have a job like that, can I? And we were in a Western Union office, and the man was doing this, transmitting messages. And I said, you bet your life you can. I said, you can sit right where he sits. And the Lord being my helper, you will, if this is what you want to do. But you see, we get so brainwashed that what we see in the newspaper, what we live in every day in the street, and what's constantly said about us, all we see in the newspapers, not all, but most of what we see in the newspapers lifts up our faults. He's a robber, he's raped somebody, he's stolen something.
Do you think the white man understands the Negro?
Well, if you say white man in terms of, generally speaking, no. Because you see, we tell the white man what we want him to know, as he tells us what he wants us to know. I doubt if there are many people, even in the same race, who really communicate enough that they don't choose their words and think what the result is going to be in the man's thinking of what he's going to say. I think increasingly there are some white people who know Negroes, but the potential of the Negro people in the South. I have real faith to believe, as little as I know about Birmingham, that when we can sit down about facts and not be changed.
Miles College is deficient in facilities, but in its student body there is noticeable evidence of the militancy which has characterized the young Negro in the South today.
Now, there are many among us who would like to express our views, but as you stated, that some persons fear economic reprisals, and that same thing holds true for some members of the white race. They would like to stand up and be counted, but the same retaliations would be directed upon them also. So if a man asks me a question, I can speak for myself, because I would not be economically depressed, because I'm already economically depressed. And so I feel free in saying just about anything I wish to say.
About the best communication we have between races is between the Negro woman and the white child. We can cook food for the whites, we can rear their children, but we cannot work beside them. We can ride elevators, we can stand beside them on buses, but we cannot sit down beside them.
We have a few smoky nightclubs, no nice places to go at night, no place to take your wife. A couple of movies, perhaps. Just a couple of movies. And they'll run down. So when you think of the Negro in Birmingham, if you're going to think of the homes, of the cars, of the factory workers, of the school teachers, then life is well. But if you live for anything other than these things, anything other than material things, then life in Birmingham, as far as I'm concerned, is hell.
Reverend Shuttlesworth's followers meet every Monday night. On the evening this meeting was filmed, 2 white members of the police department, plainclothesmen, were in the church taking notes of the proceedings. Despite the presence of the 2 white detectives, the members of Reverend Shuttlesworth's group felt free to talk about life in Birmingham.
We don't have any equal opportunities here. But I'd like to say that in the summer, I went to Mount Eagle to an integrated meeting, and you would be surprised at how I felt. We sang together, we talked together, and we washed dishes together, we ate together. There wasn't any, I didn't know whether he was white or colored. It didn't make me any difference. That's the way I felt. And I wish that everybody here could go there and just see just how the people act. So that's in Tennessee. Why can't we do something here in Alabama? What's wrong with the people here in Alabama?
When the white man keeps the Negro down, how can the Negro progress? And the only way that he can progress is by him stooping down, helping us. And we have the stability to do, if he would only open his eyes and help us do. It's not that we want to take anything away from them. We have all that we want. But there's not but one thing we want to be done and recognized as men and women, and want our children to be recognized as children. And we want our children to grow up and know that they can be free, they can laugh, or they can go and sit here or eat there just as their children. We want our children to be free and feel free. We want our children to be able to think without the pressure that we can't do this, or mother, why we can't go here, or we can't sit there. We pay our taxes. Our taxes are just as much as theirs. And I think we have the privilege, and our children have the privileges, to do as much as any other child. and we will keep on fighting. I'm the mother of 8 children, and my life is on the altar, and I will die for those 8 children. If it takes death to show them that I mean that, I meant that. I'm not afraid. I may feel that I'm afraid, but I'm not afraid. But I trust in God, and I know God. I walks with God.
A brief footnote. Who Speaks for Birmingham has been in production since the fall of 1960. But there was an epilogue which occurred just 5 days ago. At the Trailways bus depot, no cameras were at the scene, but Howard K. Smith was present and reported it.
Ever since producer David Lowe and now I arrived in Birmingham, we've been telephoned by people in the middle of the night offering tips or wanting to talk to us in private. Last night, a man phoned me, said he was close to the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan. He said he wanted to give me a tip. Be sure and be at the bus terminal on Sunday, he said, because you're going to see action. So I spent today, Sunday, alternating between watching the 2 bus terminals of the city, which happened to be about 3 blocks apart. The most conspicuous feature for most of the day was a great number of heavy-set men wearing sports shirts loitering around the bus terminals, seeming to have nothing much to do. We noticed towards the end of the afternoon that the men in sports shirts began to drift away from one of the bus terminals and accumulate at the other. We followed them, and sure enough, a bus came in. They collected around it. They dragged about 6 of the passengers out, both Negro and white. They took them into corridors and alleys and began beating them, began hitting them with lead pipes and with key rings and with their fists. They knocked one man, a white man, down at my feet, and they beat him and kicked him until his face was a bloody red pulp. At that point, someone behind me whispered in my ear and said, someone here has identified you from having seen you on television. They're hunting for you now. You'd better get out. So I moved across the street and watched the rest. The police were nearby. The police commissioner's office was only 3 blocks away, but the police did not arrive at this scene until 10 minutes late, when these men had, as if on signal, dispersed and had gone further down the street, where I saw some of them discussing their achievement of the day right under the windows of the police commissioner's office. That was recorded right after the violence of last Sunday. The violence at the bus stop had been preceded by the burning of the Freedom Riders bus at Anniston. These outsiders, who had proclaimed their intention of coming to cities such as Birmingham and Montgomery, in advance had stopped 60 miles from Birmingham and had been beaten and then attacked again in Birmingham. James Peck, the leader, required over 100 stitches and was hospitalized. Others, including Jimmy MacDonald of Yonkers, New York, were badly beaten. Well, what were your thoughts? What did it feel like to face a mob? Have you ever done it before?
I've faced mobs before, yes. But this, to me, is the worst thing that I have ever faced. My reactions were at first, nothing can harm us. We have the law on our side. And then I got to thinking about the Peace Corps. And I said, well, perhaps here. But in all honesty, I think I agree with my friend. If you want your freedom, you have to fight for it. And as Reverend Shuttlesworth said this evening, some of us will have to die for it. And I think at this point I am prepared.
Of the Sunday terror, Commissioner of Public Safety Bull Connor said his police were not able to act because it was Mother's Day and many of them were off duty. His Excellency, the Governor of Alabama, John Patterson, said, "I cannot accept the responsibility for a group of renegades who are here for the avowed purpose of stirring up trouble." In the Congress of the United States in Washington, George Huddleston, Jr., who represents the Birmingham District of Alabama, rose and proclaimed, "Every decent Southerner deplores violence, but these trespassers, these self-appointed merchants of racial hatred, got just what they deserved." The next day, it took Peck and MacDonald and the other Freedom Riders more than 8 hours to get out of town. The bus drivers refused to drive the vehicles if any of them were aboard. At the airport, one plane was taken out of service after a bomb scare. A second bomb scare occurred within the terminal. Just before dusk, a New Orleans flight was available, and when one of the passengers saw the Group N plane, he refused to stay on the same flight with them. and he was applauded by spectators for his gesture. Finally, at 10:43, the Freedom Riders were airborne for New Orleans, and Birmingham was back to normal. The Birmingham News, in a front-page editorial, asked, "Where were the police?" And it went on to say, Harrison Salisbury of the New York Times last year came to Birmingham and stated that fear and hatred stalk our streets. The paper went on, but Sunday, May the 14th, was the day which ought to be burned into Birmingham's conscience. Fear and hatred did stalk Birmingham's streets yesterday. This is Howard K. Smith speaking for CBS Reports. Good night.
CBS Reports, Who Speaks for Birmingham, was filmed and edited by the staff of CBS Reports under the supervision and control of CBS News.
I observed 4 or 5 with clubs in their hands or pieces of pipe. The police did not arrive. Fortunately, there was a detective and I think an agent of the Greyhound Company in the bus with us who did a magnificent job, as did the bus driver, in holding that door. It would have been suicide to walk out of that bus.
This is Robert Shackney in Birmingham, at the home of a Negro clergyman. And with me are part of a group calling themselves the Freedom Riders, an interracial group traveling through the Deep South to challenge some of the segregated bus facilities in this part of the country. Yesterday they ran into trouble. They ran into violence. Today they say they intend to keep up their pilgrimage. Among their leaders is James Peck. Mr. Peck, you've obviously been through a great deal. Why are you planning to keep up this ride?
We're planning to keep it up because we feel that we must not surrender to violence.
Mr. Person, can you tell us what happened when you got off the bus?
Well, when we got off the bus in Birmingham, we were antagonized by some of the hoodlums who were on the bus. As we got off the bus, Jim Peck and I, we decided to proceed with our plans.
Which were what?
To enter the lunchroom and the waiting room. So we proceeded down this ramp, and we were met by stares and catcalls. And as we entered the waiting room, the men who were aligned around the wall came toward us. They huddled us in a small corner by a pinball machine. Then they took me and forced me out of the door and threw me into the crowd, and there I was beaten by one big guy and several others. Then I was thrown forward, and I was hit on the back of the head with something. Then I wandered out into the parking area, and I was allowed to escape by a bus driver.
Are you going on with this trip?
Yes, I am.
The same thing may well happen again. Why are you going on with the trip?
Well, I feel that it's got to be done now, and I might as well be willing to sacrifice this ultimate gift, and that's my life, I guess.
are your plans now? Where are you going and what are you going to do?
We plan, just as the original plan of the trip was, to reach New Orleans on May 17th, the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision.
Mr. Peck, you obviously have been injured. You're wearing bandages. What happened to you?
I got beaten twice yesterday by hoodlums, once aboard the bus and once in the terminal in Birmingham.
And how badly are you injured? I can see the bandages, but what's it done to you?
Well, it's 50 stitches, and that's a lot of stitches.
And still in all, you're going to continue?
I think it's particularly important at this time when it has become national news that we continue and show that nonviolence can prevail over violence.
Edward Blankenheim was another freedom rider who ran into violence, I think in a different situation. Mr. Blankenheim, what happened?
We were aboard a Greyhound bus going to, coming into Birmingham. At Anniston, we were surrounded by a mob who followed us out of Anniston for about 4 miles until one of our tires went flat. At that point, they started breaking the windows of the bus with chains and pipes and one thing and another. They finally threw a bomb into the bus. I don't know what kind of bomb. All I know is that the bus filled very rapidly with black smoke, and we all hit the floor, and sooner or later, all of us realized that the bus was on fire and had to go out into the mob. By this time, the state police had got them pretty well under control, so that only 1 or 2 of our members were hit as they debarked from the bus. However, all of us suffered from smoke inhalation.
The other bus carrying freedom riders ran into a major melee in Birmingham itself. Among those on that bus was Charles Person. Mr. Peck, since you know if you continue your trip through the Deep South that violence is very likely to recur, why are you continuing the trip? Aren't you possibly creating a dangerous situation by continuing your trip?
No, we are simply upholding the law as laid down by the Supreme Court in the Irene Morgan decision aboard buses and in the Boynton decision for bus terminal facilities.
Well, don't keep blowing Clovis. Yeah, you can. All right.
The Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth has been the leader of the fight for civil rights in Birmingham for the past several years, often at great personal risk to himself. When the Freedom Riders came to Birmingham, Mr. Shuttlesworth, I understand, took action to see if they could get help from authorities. Just what is it that you've done?
Well, locally, we sent telegrams to the local police department, but nothing came of that. So today, getting ready for this furtherance of the ride, we've talked personally with Attorney General Robert Kennedy and twice with 2 of his aides. We are to call him back the moment that these people leave my house here for the buses. So they seem extremely concerned and are concerned about protection. I think that they will direct, I hope, brother, that they will direct the Justice Department to not only to investigate and see what happened, but to prevent incidents, and I believe that is his position. Actually, I told the Attorney General that Negroes here have learned to trust in God, John, and Bob.
Has the Attorney General given you any commitments about protection?
Yes, he asked me to call him back, and he said that he believed that these people should be protected. And
Did he say what kind of protection he'd give you?
Well, he asked me what kind that I think, and I told him that I thought the problem would be when the outside the cities, like the Aniston situation, where they could waylay the buses and so forth, and where the highway patrol perhaps will not escort the bus since all of this is known. And he agreed with me that that was a thing to be thought of and to be considered, and he would take it under consideration and would see to it that something is done for the protection of their constitutional rights. I told him that the FBI locally, maybe in all areas, just investigate until they are ordered, and I realized I was talking to higher authority, and I think he will order them to not only board the buses and so forth, but to prevent any violence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, we have not, because we have proven that even though the law of the land says that a passenger can ride interstate and participate in lunchroom, waiting rooms, and bathrooms, that even though the law says this, everyone cannot, particularly the Negro. Therefore, we have proven this, you see. Now, it seems that more laws either need to be enacted or those already on the books need to be enforced.
What are your plans now?
Our plans to
This is an examination room at the Central Post Office in downtown Birmingham, where, under the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965, federal officials are examining people to determine their qualifications to register and vote under the laws of Alabama. 23 examiners went to work in 3 separate locations. Business was moderate. Over 1,000 Negroes showed up for federal processing. Officials say they can handle twice this amount, that in their experience, the first few days are slow until word spreads of the federal presence. Negroes have been demonstrating for several weeks in Birmingham, demanding nighttime neighborhood registration. The federal officials say they'll stay open until 7:30 each evening, but have no current plans to go into Negro neighborhoods. Civil rights forces have been distributing leaflets which say, "Federal registrars are here. Register tonight. No reading, no writing. Come see, hear, meet, and march with Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. to the federal registrars."
March on ballot boxes until the empty stomachs of Bessemer, Fairfield, and Birmingham will be filled. Until all over this vast nation, the idle industries of Appalachia will be revitalized. March on ballot boxes until brotherhood is more than a meaningless term at the end of a prayer, but the first order of business on every legislative agenda. March on ballot boxes until the dreams of yesterday are realized. March on ballot boxes until the Negro is in the mainstream of American society. March on ballot boxes until the day when our little children will no longer be killed on Sunday morning in the church of God. March on ballot boxes.